Chapter 1, The Bond Begins. Thomas stood at the edge of the training field, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ground, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new day. He adjusted his cap, his eyes scanning the field for the newest addition to his unit. Today was the day he would meet Max, the German Shepherd who would become his partner in the field. Max was already there, sitting obediently beside his handler, Sergeant Daniels. The dog's coat was a rich blend of black and tan, his ears perked forward, and his eyes sharp and alert. Thomas could see the intelligence in those eyes, the kind of intelligence that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. "Lieutenant Thomas," Sergeant Daniels called out, waving him over. "Come meet Max." Thomas approached, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had worked with dogs before, but there was something about Max that felt different. The dog's gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, it felt as though they were already communicating, understanding each other without words. "Max, this is Lieutenant Thomas," Daniels said, gesturing to Thomas. "He's going to be your new handler." Max tilted his head slightly, as if considering Thomas. Then, to Thomas's surprise, the dog stood and walked over to him, nuzzling his hand with his nose. Thomas chuckled, scratching Max behind the ears. "Looks like we're going to get along just fine," he said. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Max trained together tirelessly. They ran obstacle courses, practiced scent detection, and worked on their communication. Max was quick to learn, and Thomas found himself amazed by the dog's ability to anticipate his commands. It was as if Max could read his mind. But it wasn't just about the training. Thomas and Max formed a bond that went beyond the field. In the evenings, after a long day of drills, Thomas would sit with Max, talking to him about everything and nothing. Max would listen, his head resting on Thomas's lap, his eyes never leaving his handler's face. Thomas found solace in those moments, a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas sat with Max by his side. He looked down at the dog, his hand resting on Max's head. "You're more than just a partner, Max," he said softly. "You're my friend." Max looked up at him, his tail thumping against the ground. In that moment, Thomas knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Chapter 2, Into the Unknown. The call came in the middle of the night. Thomas was jolted awake by the sound of his phone ringing. He grabbed it, his heart racing as he listened to the voice on the other end. It was his commanding officer, and the message was clear: they were being deployed. Thomas's mind raced as he packed his gear. He had known this day would come, but now that it was here, he felt a mix of emotions, anticipation, fear, and a deep sense of responsibility. He looked over at Max, who was already alert, sensing that something was happening. "We're going on a mission, Max," Thomas said, his voice steady. "It's going to be dangerous, but we'll get through it together." Max stood, his tail wagging slightly, as if to say he was ready. Thomas knelt down, looking into the dog's eyes. "You're the best partner I could ask for," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "No matter what happens, I need you to stay by my side." Max nuzzled Thomas's hand, his way of reassuring him. Thomas took a deep breath, standing up and slinging his pack over his shoulder. "Let's go," he said. The journey to the deployment zone was long and arduous. The unit traveled by helicopter, the noise of the rotors making conversation impossible. Thomas sat with Max by his side, his hand resting on the dog's back. He could feel the tension in Max's muscles, the way the dog's ears twitched at every sound. Max was on high alert, just like the rest of them. When they finally landed, the reality of the situation hit Thomas like a ton of bricks. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the valley. This was no training exercise. This was war. Thomas and Max were assigned to a reconnaissance mission. Their job was to scout ahead, gathering intelligence on enemy positions. It was dangerous work, but Thomas trusted Max implicitly. The dog's senses were far superior to any humans, and Thomas knew that Max would alert him to any potential threats. As they moved through the dense underbrush, Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, set his nerves on edge. But Max was calm, his movements deliberate and precise. The dog's ears were constantly moving, his nose twitching as he picked up scents that Thomas couldn't even begin to detect. Suddenly, Max stopped, his body tense. Thomas froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Max's ears were pinned back, his gaze fixed on a spot ahead. Thomas followed the dog's line of sight, his breath catching in his throat. There, hidden among the trees, was an enemy patrol. Thomas's mind raced. They were outnumbered, and if they were discovered, it would mean certain death. He looked down at Max, who was still focused on the patrol. The dog's body was coiled like a spring, ready to act at a moment's notice. "Good boy, Max," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's get out of here." With Max leading the way, they carefully retreated, moving silently through the underbrush. Thomas's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. When they finally reached safety, Thomas knelt down, wrapping his arms around Max. "You saved us, buddy," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Max wagged his tail, his tongue lolling out as if to say it was all in a day's work. Thomas smiled, ruffling the dog's fur. They had faced their first real test together, and they had come out on top. But Thomas knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but as long as he had Max by his side, he felt like they could take on anything. Chapter 3, The Storm Breaks. The days blurred together as Thomas and Max continued their mission. The war zone was a place of constant tension, where every moment could be your last. Thomas had seen things that would haunt him for the rest of his life, things he wished he could forget. But through it all, Max was his constant companion, his anchor in the chaos. One evening, as they sat in a makeshift camp, Thomas found himself reflecting on the bond he had formed with Max. The dog was more than just a partner, he was a source of comfort, a reminder of the goodness that still existed in the world. Thomas often wondered what he had done to deserve such a loyal friend. "You're a good boy, Max," Thomas said, scratching the dog behind the ears. "I don't know how I'd get through this without you." Max leaned into Thomas's touch, his tail wagging slowly. The dog seemed to understand the weight of Thomas's words, the depth of his gratitude. In that moment, Thomas felt a surge of emotion, a love for Max that went beyond words. But the war had no room for sentimentality. The next day, their unit was called to action. Intelligence had come in about an enemy stronghold, and they were tasked with taking it out. It was a high-risk mission, but one that could turn the tide of the war. As they prepared to move out, Thomas felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He looked down at Max, who was sitting calmly by his side. The dog's eyes were focused, his body tense with anticipation. Thomas knelt down, placing a hand on Max's head. "This is it, Max," he said, his voice steady. "We're going in. Stay close to me, and do what you do best." Max nuzzled Thomas's hand, his way of saying he understood. Thomas took a deep breath, standing up and slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's move out," he said to his team. The mission was a blur of chaos and violence. The enemy was well entrenched, and the fighting was intense. Thomas and Max moved together, their bond stronger than ever. Max's senses were invaluable, alerting Thomas to hidden dangers in enemy positions. Time and again, the dog's quick thinking saved their lives. But as the battle raged on, Thomas could feel the toll it was taking on both of them. Max's movements were slower, his breathing heavier. The dog was exhausted, but he refused to give up. Thomas could see the determination in Max's eyes, the same determination that drove him to keep going. Then, in a moment that would change everything, Thomas heard the unmistakable sound of a sniper's bullet whizzing through the air. He barely had time to react before the bullet struck him, the impact sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded in his leg, and he knew immediately that it was bad. "Max!" Thomas cried out, his voice filled with desperation. The dog was at his side in an instant, his body tense with alarm. Thomas could see the fear in Max's eyes, but also the determination. The dog wasn't going to leave him. "I'm hurt, Max," Thomas said through gritted teeth. "I need you to get help. Go find the others." Max hesitated, his eyes locked on Thomas's. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, but Thomas knew that he had to make Max understand. "Go, Max," he commanded, his voice firm. "Go." With a final, lingering look, Max turned and bolted into the chaos, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly through the battlefield. Thomas watched him go, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. He knew that Max would do everything in his power to save him. As the pain in his leg intensified, Thomas clung to the thought of Max, the bond they shared, and the hope that the dog would return with help. In that moment, he realized just how much Max meant to him, not just as a partner, but as a friend, a brother, a lifeline in the darkest of times. Chapter 4, The Long Night. The battlefield was a cacophony of noise, gunfire, explosions, and the distant cries of the wounded. Thomas lay on the ground, his leg throbbing with pain. He had managed to drag himself to a relatively safe spot, but he knew that he was still in danger. The enemy was close, and if they found him, it would be the end. Thomas's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew that Max would do everything in his power to get help, but he also knew that time was running out. The pain in his leg was becoming unbearable, and he could feel himself growing weaker with each passing moment. He thought back to the bond he had formed with Max, the countless hours they had spent training together, the moments of quiet companionship in the midst of chaos. Max was more than just a dog, he was a part of Thomas's soul. And now, as he lay there, wounded and alone, Thomas realized just how much he relied on Max. "Come on, Max," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the battlefield. "You can do it. I know you can." As the hours passed, the pain in Thomas's leg became almost unbearable. He tried to stay alert, to keep his mind focused, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. He could feel himself slipping in and out of consciousness, his thoughts becoming disjointed and fragmented. But through it all, one thought remained clear: Max. Thomas clung to the image of the dog, the memory of his loyal companion. He knew that Max would never give up on him, and that thought gave him the strength to keep going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thomas heard the sound of footsteps approaching. His heart leapt with hope, but he forced himself to stay still, to remain silent. He couldn't risk giving away his position. Then, he heard it, a familiar bark. Max's bark. Thomas's heart swelled with relief as he saw the dog emerge from the darkness, his tail wagging furiously. Behind him were several members of Thomas's unit, their faces filled with concern. "Max!" Thomas cried out, his voice filled with emotion. The dog bounded over to him, nuzzling his hand with his nose. Thomas reached out, his hand trembling as he stroked Max's fur. "You did it, buddy," he said, his voice choked with tears. "You saved me." The soldiers quickly moved to Thomas's side, assessing his injuries and preparing to move him to safety. Thomas's leg was badly broken, and he would need immediate medical attention. But as they worked, Thomas's eyes never left Max. The dog sat by his side, his body tense with concern. Max's eyes were locked on Thomas's, and in that moment, Thomas felt a surge of love and gratitude for his loyal companion. Max had risked everything to save him, and Thomas knew that he would never be able to repay him. As they carried him away, Thomas reached out one last time, his hand brushing against Max's fur. "Thank you, Max," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "You're my hero." Max wagged his tail, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. The bond between them was unbreakable, a testament to the power of loyalty and love. And as Thomas was carried to safety, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and Max would face them together. Chapter 5: The Road to Recovery. The days that followed were a blur of pain and exhaustion for Thomas. His leg had been badly broken, and the doctors had to perform surgery to repair the damage. The recovery process was long and grueling, but through it all, Max was by his side. The hospital staff had made an exception for Max, allowing him to stay with Thomas during his recovery. The dog was a constant presence, his warm body providing comfort and solace to Thomas as he struggled through the pain. Thomas's days were filled with physical therapy, his body slowly healing from the trauma of the battlefield. But it was Max who kept him going, the dog's unwavering loyalty and love giving Thomas the strength to push through the pain. As the weeks passed, Thomas began to regain his strength. His leg was still weak, but he was able to walk with the help of a cane. And through it all, Max was there, his steady presence a reminder of the bond they shared. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, Thomas sat with Max by his side. The dog's head rested on Thomas's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Thomas stroked Max's fur, his mind wandering back to the battlefield, to the moment when Max had saved his life. "You're my hero, Max," Thomas said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Max looked up at him, his tail wagging slowly. The dog's eyes were filled with love and loyalty, and in that moment, Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for the bond they shared. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas and Max grew even closer. The dog was more than just a companion, he was a part of Thomas's soul. And as Thomas continued to heal, he knew that he would never be able to repay Max for the loyalty and love the dog had shown him. But Thomas also knew that Max didn't need repayment. The dog's loyalty was unconditional, a testament to the bond they shared. And as Thomas looked into Max's eyes, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Chapter 6: A New Beginning. The day finally came when Thomas was discharged from the hospital. His leg was still weak, but he was able to walk with the help of a cane. And as he stepped out into the sunlight, he felt a sense of freedom and hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. Max was by his side, his tail wagging furiously as they walked together. The dog seemed to sense that this was a new beginning, a chance to start over. And as Thomas looked down at Max, he felt a surge of love and gratitude for the dog who had saved his life. They returned to the base, where Thomas was greeted with cheers and applause from his fellow soldiers. They had all heard the story of how Max had saved Thomas's life, and the dog was hailed as a hero. But to Thomas, Max was more than just a hero, he was a part of his family. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas and Max settled back into their routine. Thomas continued his physical therapy, his leg growing stronger with each passing day. And through it all, Max was by his side, his steady presence a reminder of the bond they shared. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Thomas reflected on everything they had been through. The war had taken its toll on both of them, but it had also brought them closer together. Max was more than just a dog, he was a part of Thomas's soul. "We've been through a lot, Max," Thomas said softly, his hand resting on the dog's head. "But we made it. And no matter what happens, we'll always have each other." Max looked up at him, his eyes filled with love and loyalty. The dog's tail wagged slowly, and in that moment, Thomas felt a surge of emotion. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and Max would face them together. As the stars twinkled overhead, Thomas and Max sat together, their bond unbreakable. They had been through the darkest of times, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they would face it together, as partners, as friends, and as family. This story is a testament to the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his loyal dog, a bond forged in the fires of war and strengthened